Hello. Hey, everybody. Welcome to an interesting time these days. I'm Dan Bowen, and I've been working on balloons for 17 or 18 years now. First, a science researcher and just having fun with friends while pushing to understand and learn techniques in ballooning. Eventually became a project consultant in about 2012 and have worked on multiple small balloon projects and was with Google's Project Loon for about 8 years in the middle of the 2010s. Let's change our title down here. So there's been a lot of in the news about balloons. We're going to talk tonight on the small balloons that were intercepted by the United States and Romania, and not on the large Chinese balloon that was also shot down. We actually talked about the Chinese one earlier in the week on a previous stream that you can find on my Twitch or YouTube live histories. So let's take a look at the thing we're going to talk about. So let's actually go back to the sort of elephant in the room. The balloons that were intercepted by the U.S., we think at least 2 of them were amateur Pico balloons made by regular citizens, ham radio operators, as was the one in Romania. And this map here, one of the main reasons why we know this, and this is called sondhub.org, and I have the creator of this, Mark Jessup today. And Mark, let's go ahead and if you would, give us a little intro to your experience and what Sondhub does for us.
Yeah, so I've been doing high altitude balloons since about 2010, though not the Pico balloon variety. Here in Australia, we can't get approval to do Pico balloons, as it turns out, and so we just do regular latex up and down balloon flights. I've been in the community since that time, and over the last couple of years, there's been this, and unfortunately, there's been a tracking website around called HabHub for many, many years, developed by the guys at the Cambridge University in the UK. In the last few years, there's been a move to shut down that service due to various reasons. And so myself and Michaela Wheeler, a couple of years ago, we developed a new database and tracking website for radiosondes, so meteorological radiosondes. And that was quite successful, and we decided to extend it to amateur radio balloons as well. And eventually we've taken over from HabHub. And now the Sondhub map, which you're looking at there, is one of the main ways for hobbyist balloonists to track their balloon flights. It accepts data from a range of different sources. It can be submitted directly to our database. It also accepts it via the Amateur Packet Reporting System, APRS, which is where we often get a lot of traffic from these Pico balloons. So the Pico balloons transmit on the HF shortwave bands using a very, very low data rate modulation scheme called a WSPR, and that gets received and then imported into APRS, and then we see it on our map. Sondhub is entirely crowdsourced. It's run off donations. We thank the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Group for giving us a grant, which has kept us going for quite some time. And we also thank our Patreon and other donators as well, because unfortunately what we're doing is quite expensive to run. It isn't ADS-B Exchange, but it is a lot of data, and particularly when we get hit in the mainstream media, it's a lot of load on our website. That's for sure.
Mark, thank you for giving us an intro there. It's great to see you. Mark and I actually met years and years ago at a UK High Altitude Society balloon conference, where many amateurs around Europe world sort of congregate each year to share knowledge and present their experiments. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you as well.
Nice. Well, we'll come back to SoundHub a little, Mark, if you don't mind sticking around.
Not a problem.
Awesome. See you in it. Great to see Mark there. As you know, SoundHub has been the backbone of how we all know about these balloons. Although actually, that's something I need to tell you about. So let's turn that off. So these Pico balloons, the devices, the objects that were shot down by the U.S., it may seem interesting to you that we know what they are. We know who made them. We know why they're flying. And curious to you why the U.S. government didn't, or at least didn't appear to know what they were and where they were from. As Mark had said, amateurs have been generally flying latex weather balloons, which are just big, round rubber balloons that carry things like that up in the air for 2 hours or so to 100,000 feet, for example. The balloon will burst and it will fall down on a parachute and land gently on the ground. And these amateur balloonists will track it via radio, satellite communications, so that they can go recover electronics, their videos, and their experiments. And that is done by people all around the world in places where this operation is legal for them to do based on their country's regulations, and if outside of national borders, legal by the international regulations. These types of balloons, these Pico balloons that you've heard of in the news, are much different than the latex balloons. These are the culmination of amateur balloon science for probably 20 years. We have been working to push the limits of what we're capable of as hobbyists, and there's obvious outgrowths of that in altitude, and the other main growth direction to push in is time in the air. So it turns out if you're interested in pushing the limit, the way to do that is with money. You just put a bigger balloon on, which costs more. Quickly people realized is uninteresting and also unattainable. One person who has the most money win that. It's not a skill-based achievement. However, to fly for a long period of time, to beat those 2 hours, to see your balloon make it away from where you see it drift away and hope that it might go farther than the last time, to hope you might beat your friend in the distance drifted or the time that you stay up in the air, is what pushes the amateurs to go beyond the latex to try and accomplish something called a super pressure balloon. This is a balloon that will stay at a constant altitude and drift with the wind. As long as it doesn't leak, it'll stay up there. Now the theory behind that sounds very simple, and of course on paper you just put helium in a bag and you calculate how big the balloon should be and should let it go and it works. Of course the devil's in the details in engineering, and it took, I would say, probably 8 years of us generally thinking about and experimenting until amateurs finally achieved a long duration amateur that went purpose around the globe. Now let's see if we can get some pictures of these Pico balloons up here. I think it'd be interesting for you guys. Let's turn off Mark thing. I'm not Mark. Yeah, say this is a casual chat mostly today, so we'll have starts and stops. We'll have lulls and discussions here. Please feel free to put questions or comments in the chat of whatever platform you're watching on. They should all get to me here. Just make sure I can actually see that. Yep. Okay, so let's pull up some pictures. As you may have heard, the descriptions that the U.S. government gave of these Pico balloons are of the objects they intercepted are spot-on descriptions of Pico balloons, as you'll see here in a minute. Okay, let's share this window. By the way, the image behind me here is Hangar 2 at Moffett Field in Sunnyvale, California, with an airship hangar, World War II, out of wood. It's a wooden airship hangar. And I had the great fortune to actually work in that hangar for many years in Project Loon development testing phases. We would inflate balloons to pressure tests and cycle fatigue tests and general design verifications. So this is an example of a classic Pico balloon you see here. A commercial off-the-shelf party balloon. Amazing that this has been what Americans have come to success with. There was a lot of work on customized balloons, and there's been great development and success with that. But the off-the-shelf party balloon of a certain manufacturer does stunningly well. This is Bill Brown, WB8ELK. He's here in the chat, actually. He's been in ballooning and etcher ballooning for a long time. He's a great advisor. He's done a ton of balloons. But you can see here the size of this balloon, about 36 inches in diameter, and it is aluminized mylar. And he's holding the electronics that go on board this balloon. Let's go on to that photo as Greg posted. Thank you. Come back to that. So the circuit board being held here, and its two little solar panels out to the side, weighs no more than 15 grams. And that's really lightweight. There's nothing else that flies on this balloon because the balloon cannot lift much mass. So in order to accomplish the bare minimum that you need ballooning, which is to know where it is, in addition to succeeding at flying, you have to have a radio transmitter, a GPS, and power. These balloons can't lift much mass, like 3 to 15 grams is typically all you can support, and the 15 gram end is a pretty big balloon, like a 7-foot balloon, as opposed to this 36-inch balloon. And you can see here the solar panels are super light, and the antenna for this radio is just a simple thin wire that goes up balloon and dangles down below. For the balloons that are able to transmit their location over the oceans, they actually have a 17-foot long wire that dangles below the balloon and another 17-foot long wire that dangles from the circuit board. And this allows them to actually transmit their location with a very simple digital protocol over ham radio, over the HF band, or you may know it as the shortwave bands. And this band, 20 meters, allows this signal to go around the planet in the same direction, but there are people around the world that have centralized, they have receivers of this protocol that all end to the same central database, so that if your signal is only going from South America to Africa, the African receivers could relay that back to the central database. How you see on this map, anything that is currently over the ocean, let's see if we bring that map up again, you will see those are being relayed via that protocol. Oh, it doesn't want to zoom in. And that's how we actually have paths from these, is that shortwave. A side effect of these being solar powered with just panels and no mass for batteries is that their positions cannot update. They cannot transmit anything in the dark because their only power comes from live sunlight. I see some of you guys are posting in the chat. Let's go ahead here, see if we've got any questions. We'll just take a break from that, and then we'll go back to Mark Jessup so he can explain a little bit more about how this works in the data, the digital data side of things here, and how SondHub works. Okay. Yep, Greg, thank you for posting some photos there in the chat. And he's got a close-up of the circuit board, the last link he posted. By the way, everybody feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll get to them occasionally. We'll take a little sidebar to look through those. So Mark, let's find you. Where'd you go? Let's go ahead and talk to Mark again here. Hey Mark, you there?
Yep.
Cool. Do you actually want to try and screen share, or do you just want to talk while I poke around in SondHub?
Just talking's fine.
Okay.
I guess I can discuss Whisper if you like, and how that works.
Sure. Yeah.
So Whisper is as Dan mentioned, a HF modulation method, or modulation mode. It was developed, I can't remember the exact date, but probably about 10, 15 years ago, if not older. And it was designed for propagation monitoring. So for amateur radio operators to be able to determine whether radio paths are available between certain locations, and mainly regarding the HF band, or the shortwave band, which propagates around the world by refraction off the ionosphere. Now, Whisper runs at an extremely low data rate. So if you think about old telephone data modems, which might run at 9600 or 3600 baud or whatever, Whisper runs at 1.46 baud. So that's 1.46 bits approximately per second. A Whisper transmission takes 2 minutes to send, or approximately 2 minutes to send. And as a result, it's extremely robust. So these pico balloons are only transmitting with approximately maybe 10 to 20 milliwatts of power. We're talking about the amount of power that it takes to light up a small LED. And with the right modulation, with the right receiving conditions, with the right antennas and the right propagation conditions, that can be decoded all the way around the world. Not always reliably, but it can happen, and it's reliable enough that it's been used for these pico balloons. The other reason it was chosen, other reason why pico ballooners have used it, is because there's an existing network of receiving stations. WhisperNet is the website where they're contributing data to. WhisperNet's been around for a long time for this propagation monitoring aspect, and so pico balloonists realized that if they transmit using this modulation, then they've already got potentially hundreds of receiving stations capable of receiving their telemetry. They've also figured out various ways, and I'm going to potentially break some friendships here and call them hacks, of getting additional data through this channel. Whisper was really designed for sending a call sign, a very, very coarse position. When we're talking about coarse as in maybe only a couple of kilometers resolution, and a power and some power information to know how much power the transmitter was sending. There's been various ways to send extra information. So for example, altitude information, which is pretty important for a balloon flight. You want to know what altitude it's at so you can predict where it's going to travel based upon global forecast models. and other data as well. So like number of satellites. Anyway, they figured out various ways of sending this through this Whisper network. So all those receiving stations, if they receive telemetry, it gets uploaded to a central database, WhisperNet, and from there it can be accessed by anybody. And people have written various tools for looking for new packets, extracting the relevant information, so more than just the basic position, but it could be a high resolution position or the altitude information, etc., and then pushing that onwards to other mapping services. So there's the amateur packet reporting system, which is where most data gets pushed into. That's visible on a number of websites like aprs.fi, and also SondHub as well. So these balloons, yeah, it could be any number of receiving stations tracking them. They're all generally on the same band, which is the amateur, what we call the 20-meter band, or which is 14 megahertz. And yeah, they're only transmitting during the day, and it is just quite amazing how well this tracking works, given the extremely tight power and mass budgets. And yet we're able to quite reliably track these on their way around the world. So yeah, it's a pretty incredible feat of engineering, I would say. All we're running is just the mapping system at the end of it. Everything behind it is really a massive group effort from amateur radio operators.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see the evolution of the balloon tracking network from 2007, when the UK Haas members and I started the first tracking network to do transatlantic balloons, and it grew up into habhub.org, run by Cambridge University students. Is that who wrote that?
Yeah.
And that was sunset due to old technology, and Mark, it was you and a couple other people that brought this new system up to replace it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So myself and Michaela Wheeler, we'd already had a radiosonde tracking system running for a while, and it's also worth noting that tracking system handles an order of magnitude more volume of data than this amateur system. So we decided that, well, we could just do amateur tracking as well. It's really not much extra effort. There are various differences, there are various challenges, and there are extra features that amateur radio operators want out of a tracking system. For example, the ability to predict the forward path of a long duration balloon flight. We don't need that for a regular radiosonde flight, because they don't do that. But yeah, so we basically extended our system to support amateur balloons, and then essentially we took over from HabHub at that time when HabHub was retired, because there was really nothing else out there to do it, and it was a service that needed to be continued, not just for these Pico balloon flights, but just for those that are doing regular up and down latex balloon launches. Having live tracking online is really important, and in some cases, for example, my instrument or my approval with our Australian Aviation Authority requires me to have our position of our balloon on a map available to the public and to ATC throughout our flight. It's not common to have that kind of restriction, but we've got it.
Yeah.
And so we're invested in making sure this mapping system works.
The SondHub has been phenomenally helpful as a very smooth takeover of the previous one, and we'll look at the radiosonde side of this in a moment. To give you guys some context, radiosondes are weather balloons that are launched by international of many countries twice a day. They send up a weather balloon from various stations, and it transmits weather data, including its location, which gives you wind speed, temperature, humidity, and air pressure. And those take these measurements all the way up to the stratosphere, where they burst and come down on a parachute, and they transmit that data live back to the ground, where all of those reports are fed into the global weather forecast model and the local weather forecast models. And the balloon data still, after, I think they've been doing this since the 30s for global models, possibly, Still, the weather balloons provide a large amount of the data that is actually giving us weather forecasts today. There's just a quality of data from satellites that's just not there, large margin, than actually getting actual in-air samples. And these are flown from 900 sites on the planet twice per day. And that means every day, all around the world, there are 1,800 weather balloons launched. And these weather balloons are the latex balloons that let's look at a typical latex balloon. This one being an amber balloon. Where's this? Let's open that image window again. I'm gonna pull you off for a minute, Mark. Okay. Window. There we go. So this is the typical size of a radiosonde balloon. It is made of raw latex, like a surgical glove, and when it's released, the National Weather Service payloads are about the size of a wallet, maybe a hammer, and they are disposable. They fly up, and then they are lost, and they can be recovered by other people, but typically they are just left as a sacrifice for their collection. But the of these balloons that launch every day is staggering, and the regulations around the world are crafted so that these balloons are constructed and operated in a manner that is safe for aviation and safe for people on the ground. And the calculations have been made back in the 1950s and onward over and over again to determine how these should be made so that any potential interference with aircraft or things on the ground would produce minimal impact or minimal concern. And the way these are controlled in terms of their risk is the mass allowed to be carried, the string that it's attached to, and a couple of other things. But for weather balloons and radiosondes, they typically arrive at safety by being so small, low density, and the string that dangles below the balloon is very weak. So if there's any impact with anything, this takes the bit of the impact and just, it falls apart. So this assured by the rules. Each country has slightly different rules for weather balloons, including the US, the UK, Australia. Every country has their own rules, or they defer to the national rules, which are operating in all non-sovereign airspace, which are very similar to the US rules. And many countries have just used the international for their own in-country rules. And these rules are what amateur balloons operate under. There's usually not an explicit prohibition for anyone in particular to fly a balloon when they're abiding by these rules. The federal law in the United States and the ICAO define specific mass, as we said before, and string breaking strength, and a couple other things that if you're below this limit, you're considered safe and not a factor air traffic to be concerned about. And thus, while there are 1,800 launched every day, they aren't tracked by the FAA or air traffic control because we have learned to operate these things statistically safely. And amateur balloons add very little in terms of statistical exposure to persons in the air or on the ground when you consider there are 1,800 professional ones of the same exact type and construction flying every day. If you extrapolate out that to I believe the Earth launches 660,000 balloons a year to get our weather data. And all of those go from sea level or the local ground altitude all the way up to 60,000 to 100,000 feet. So they cross through all of the normal aviation tracks and far above those, even far above military planes if you're going up to 100,000 feet. And let's see, Greg's got a picture of a radiosonde. That's great. I'm not sure everybody in that can see the pictures, but Greg is posting on Facebook. Later on, I'll try and pull some of the balloon pictures together. But these balloons, to relate them to how the radiosondes and the amateur latex balloons fly, these were flying at between 35,000 and 50,000 feet. If you recall, the radiosondes and amateur balloons go all the way up to 60,000 or 100,000 plus feet above ground. So it's in the normal operating range of balloons. Let's go ahead and look over to chat, see what we got here. Hey, Robert, good to see you. There's several amateurs I know here in the chat today. I may give a shout out to them here. Of course, Bill Brown is one of the legends who's been doing balloons for forever. And in fact, he taught me how to do balloons back in 2003, I think it was. Let's see. Again, feel free to drop questions in that here. This is informal. I've been fairly formal about this. It is a Q&A AMA. No questions. You guys are quiet today. Oh, I should... I keep leaving Mark's name up there. I'm not Mark Jessup. Mark is the founder and operator of SoundHub. I am Dan Bowen. I should put my name up here so you guys know who I actually am if you clip this. There you go. Oh, that's me. Okay, so we've got no questions in the chat here, but again, feel free to toss questions in there anytime. Let's look at some other things we'd like to talk about here. Okay, so let's look at the SoundHub to understand how this all works. And then after this, we'll actually discuss the individual incidents of the Yukon, the Northern Alaska, and the Romanian incident in specific detail for as much as we or can extrapolate. I'm not going to claim to have all of the info, but I think I've got enough of it to be educational for you guys. Let's take a look here at SoundHub. Okay, let's see how this works. I'll bring Mark back in here to back me up on explanations. Okay, here we go. And share the screen. SoundHub Amateur. How did that work? There. Okay.
It's Amateur SoundHub.
Yeah, thank you. Amateur.soundhub.org is the tracker for the amateur high altitude balloons, and the I should share this whole window so I could show you both tabs. Let's do that.
We jokingly refer to the meteorological radio sonde version as professional SoundHub.
I like that. Okay, so here's the amateur one, and here is the professional SoundHub. And you see each of these is a balloon. Mark, do you want to explain just why we're seeing so many balloons right now?
Well, interestingly, if you showed this map 2 years ago, there would have been almost nothing over the US because 2 years ago we didn't even have support for the radiosonde types that we used in the US. But anyway, The data you see on this map is data from meteorological radiosondes, as Dan said, launched from many places around the world, and the telemetry from these radiosondes has been successfully reverse engineered and can be received using software-defined radio techniques. And there's a range of software which can do this. The telemetry is surprisingly easy to receive. It's quite relatively low data rate. And again, a number of years ago, I developed some software to automate the process, to basically scan across a known set of radiosonde frequencies or frequency range, and then lock on and start decoding them and upload them to this website, to SondHub. And there are currently about 1,000 stations, 1,000 receiving stations contributing data to SondHub, running various software. Some of it is mine, some of it is other people's. It all works pretty well. And so everywhere you see a balloon on that map, there is someone nearby receiving that telemetry. And in fact, the little green dots on the map there they're all receiving stations. And so over the last couple of years, we've seen this huge increase in receiving stations around the world. Now, Dan, if you change the time scale on the top left-hand corner there, the little drop-down box, change it to 6 hours, and we'll get a better picture of those flight paths eventually. The volume of data is gigantic.
It's high.
It's worth noting.
But you'll see the reason why there's so many right now is this is the when were launched. What would that have been? Just before midnight UTC?
So 23:15. So the regular radiosonde launch times are around 06:18 and 06:12 and 18 Zulu. But the idea is to get a snapshot of the atmosphere at those times or across those times. As a result, the radiosondes are launched approximately 45 minutes before, so at 23:15 Zulu, 5:15, 11:15, etc. In this case, this was the 0 Zulu launch, so they will have all launched at 23:15 Zulu, and so that's why there's so many on the map right now. We're just seeing the tail end.
So they just launched an hour ago, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
A little bit longer than that.
Oh, cool.
They would have actually probably mostly landed by now. The reason some of the balloons still appear to be in the air, they might have a balloon icon or still a parachute icon, is because we only have so many radio receivers. They can only receive from a certain distance away. We may not capture data all the way down to the ground. To do that, we need more and more receivers. It's worth noting that the meteorological agencies that launch these things, they don't track them after burst. They just don't care, because after burst, the data from the sensors on these radiosondes becomes unreliable because they're calibrated for a certain airspeed past them, usually 5 meters per second. So they just don't track them. They don't, in pretty much every case, they don't recover them. And in probably 99% of cases, there are some very, very small exceptions here, they don't reuse them, or they can't reuse them, because the radiosondes are damaged on landing. So they litter the countryside. However, there are hobbyists out there that go out and recover these for fun, and we can reprogram some of these radiosondes for our own purposes. For example, for our own balloon tracking on our own launches.
Awesome. Mark, thank you for that. And let's go ahead and get on to actually talking about the mechanics of the Pico balloons. I'll bring you back in a little bit here.
No worries.
Let's see. We do that. Cool. Okay. The Pico balloons themselves are. Let's bring those pictures back here. As you can see, they're very tiny, and when they climb up to their altitude, they will actually pressurize and stabilize their altitude between, again, like 35 and 50,000 feet. And when they get there, they are just like something floating in the ocean. They will drift along with the winds for as long as they stay in those winds. And that means that they have no control, There's no way to steer them, there's no way to end their flights, and there's no way to slow them down or speed them up. The only thing you can do is track them where they've been, and you can the global weather forecast predict where they're going to go. So let's take a look at we use SoundHub again here. Let's put me in the corner, and let's see, going over to, okay, so I'm going to turn me off for a second. Okay, so we'll look here at the, this is the, sure, let me reload this thing here. So this is Amateur SoundHub. You can see these colored paths are where these balloons are reported in their positions. And we know where they've been because we have them on this map that SoundHub provides. And if we want to know where they might go in the future, we can click on one, and SoundHub will provide a float prediction for this. And it will calculate it in a minute, and it will show us all the possible, whoa, a little too far, all the possible routes that this balloon could take. And these circles are, I think, about 4 hours apart, so you can see how long it would take to get to a certain distance. That's helpful to know, you know, either for entertainment or just simply to know when it might come near a radio receiver again, what its future path is going to be. And these days it seems where you might cross a border where things might happen. So for us as amateurs, when we launch one of these for fun, for recreation, it's cool to just see where it's going to go, to just wonder what's around it, what it's crossing, and what you might encounter in the future. For example, this one, the person who runs this one may find it pretty neat to see that's going near Antarctica. And for the ones that flew into the US last week, it was possible for us in the community to know where those balloons were going to go. And in fact, the first balloon that was reported as having shot down was here in northern Alaska. And we suspect that balloon was an amateur Pico balloon. However, because these can only transmit in the sun, that balloon is believed to have not transmitting for a long time. We believe it to have been in the Arctic Circle because we had no reports of a balloon being there, but these balloons can often get trapped up here during the winter, where you can see this, the shading of the night shows the Arctic is dark because it's the middle of the winter. And so when that appeared here over North Alaska and it met the description of a Pico balloon, that was not surprising to us that we didn't know where. We didn't hear a report of that, but it's very likely to have been one. When we heard about the northern Alaska shoot down, the people in the community, we saw one out here just east of Russia, the prediction going right up into Alaska and the Yukon. And we were all nervous. We were concerned about this becoming an incident. And indeed, it certainly did. Sorry, I'm looking for a photo here. There we go. Let's put this one in preview. I'll show you a photo of the path that we have run in terms of when we saw the thing coming near Alaska. Like, we knew ahead of time. Like, I knew, Emma knew that we're concerned about this, that it was coming. We're like, oh shit, there's going to be another interception here. And we know whose balloon it is, we know where it came from, we know where it's going. And that sucked, because we knew, and it seemed like nobody else did. We didn't really know how to rectify the situation in time. And I don't believe we got word to anybody in time. Let's look at the path prediction for that. that flight. Okay. So you can see here this balloon, this was the last time we saw it as it approached up to the coast of Alaska. And as you see, the rainbow colored prediction lines predict this balloon will indeed be in the northwest Yukon Territory in just a few hours. And that is indeed where the report of the interception and the shoot down was. So we are 98% sure that this balloon was the one. The person who made this has confirmed that he provided information to the government to help them understand the situation. And as you can tell, the description of these balloons being tiny little payload hanging from a string, from a silvery shiny balloon or a long cylindrical balloon the width of a car, which is again the maximum size of these Pico balloons is about 7 feet, and sometimes they're silver and sometimes clear. So except the one over Lake Huron, these all match the altitude, the visual description of the size, and the location of known amateur Pico balloons. Let's go ahead and check the chat again. And again, if you have any questions, you can comment in YouTube or on whatever platform you are watching. By the way, the best ballooning news source on the planet is Strato Balloon on Twitter. Goes by the name StratoCat. He provides a website that tracks all the major happenings on the science balloon projects, the government ones, and sometimes the amateur, interesting amateur ones as well. Mike asks, do Pico balloons require a transponder? And no, they don't, actually. We'll get into that in a minute, of the actual requirements for these balloons. But because the Pico balloon meets the exemption class that the radiosondes fall under, those balloons don't require a radar transponder at all. And of course, by transponder, ADS-B is the modern term for that. And for those of you not in the know, an ADS-B transponder is what is on aircraft that transmits and is received from sites like Flight Radar 24 and allows you to track so many commercial and private planes, balloons. When they're really big, they are really required to carry a transponder. As you'll see on Flight Radar, some government balloons and a bit large balloons will show up on the map. Let's actually pull it up. These it's very cute. They actually show up as little balloon icons. See if we can filter out really quickly here the boring planes. I'm sure many of you are shouting at the screens for where to find the filter. Oh, there we go. Let's do aircraft. Let's just do call sign. Let's see. Call sign of balloons is usually highball number, but I'm probably filtering this incorrectly. we'll come back to this. Somebody feel free to post in the chat the right way to filter balloons out of all this mess. Yeah, there's usually one or two flying over the U.S. When Project Loon was running, there would usually be 5 over the U.S., probably 30 or 40 around the planet. Let's go back to, okay. Yeah, and I wasn't even sharing that. Okay. So let's talk about the laws here. The question is, are these things legal? And of course, operating within the country, it is legal. The international laws, we'll take a look. We'll take a look at the FAA laws. Let me see if there's any other things that would be good to discuss before we jump into those. As far as radio transmitting, some countries do not allow balloons to transmit radio over their airspace, and the amateurs generally use the GPS to determine which countries they're not supposed to transmit over, and they just don't send signals until they've drifted past those countries. All right, well, so actually, let's skip the laws detail right now. Let's actually get into the meat of like what changed today. President Biden announced that they now know that these were balloons. The interceptions were either commercial or recreational or research balloons, and posed no threat to United States security. And he did indicate that the rules and regulations would have to be changed to deal with these in the future in the U.S., and he also indicated that other countries, he would work with them to be modifying the rules. And that's to amateurs, that's kind of a frightening situation, because we have operated under international law with these Pico balloons, which allows us to drift over all signatory countries who participate in the ICAO treaty. And that means basically they don't have to ask permission to fly through those countries as long as they're very small and that they contribute somewhat to weather data. Any of these Pico balloons are tracked using SoundHub by weather researchers to get more data on wind patterns around. So they are actually contributing to weather data. However, clearly they are not. Clearly they're making people upset right now. While these balloons have been drifting around for 10 years around the world, now people are noticing them and sitting up. Biden said that the rules for launching unmanned free balloons in the United States would be reviewed and modified. And these Pico balloons fall into that same category of unmanned free. And by unmanned, it just means anything that doesn't have a human on board, which radiosondes, balloons, and anything that's not propelled would include. A free balloon means it's tethered, and generally that it doesn't have a significant propulsion system, but that's debatable. So we'll look at the rules in a bit, but considering what might change here, there are several other countries that have more restrictive laws than the U.S. I've explained the conditions that U.S. amateurs launch under, which is primarily if your equipment is 12 pounds or 5.7 kilograms, it's spread into multiple boxes of 4 pounds or less. Generally, you can fly without coordination with air traffic control. Above those limits, you do have to actually coordinate ATC. You have to file a notice, a TAM, so the pilots are made aware, and ideally carry a radar transponder or a radar reflector. You have to be able to terminate the balloon safely remotely or autonomously continuously, reliably, for example. Those are the main ones to have. And in other countries, they have much more restrictive laws. Mark, why don't you give us a very quick summary of Australian balloon regulations that are not so permissive as the US ones and that have kind of restricted the capabilities amateurs have had to experiment there?
Sure. So here in Australia, I believe our laws are kind of based off of the ICAO rules as well. We have 4 categories of balloon sizes: small, light, medium, and heavy. Small is everything under 50 grams. Light is 50 grams to 4 kilograms. Then we have medium, which is a ridiculous section because it's 4 to 6 kilograms. I have no idea why. And then we have heavy, which is everything above 6 kilograms. Us amateurs generally fall in the light balloon category. For our regular kind of latex balloon launches, we have to go through an approvals process. It used to be
So
fairly simple to go through.
that's a big difference. U.S. amateurs don't have to have any permission given, but you actually have to apply for permission.
Yep.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And we have to fill out some fairly lengthy forms. We have to provide a risk assessment, a run sheet of what we're doing.
Wow.
That gets reviewed by our aviation authority. They will comment on it. And that whole process costs about $400 Australian. It's the same process to launch a sub 50 gram balloon, as it turns out, which is insane. Thankfully, it's not per launch. One approval can cover multiple launches, which makes it somewhat more reasonable. However, it's still a barrier of entry to the hobby. And it's a reason why many of us, well, no one here, no amateur has launches using hydrogen yet, because CASA will look at our risk assessment and probably require us to have the same precautions as, say, the European.
And is CASA the equivalent of the US FAA?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the fact is, so recently, some people tried to get approval to do a small balloon launch. If you read our regulations, it actually says no approval required for certain categories of small balloon launches. However, when you go and talk to CASA about it, they say because you're launching a small balloon outside of visual line of sight, you have to get approval. And if you want to launch a small balloon which is going to travel outside of Australia, you require written approval from every country it's going to fly over, which is just insane, right? No one can comply with this, so no one does it. So we don't do pico balloons here in Australia. I know it was done a number of years ago. There were people that did it. As of now, we cannot legally do it. We are in the light balloon category, latex balloons only for us.
That's interesting. And so that is a local regulation that they have tightened farther down than the ICAO sort of split. And that makes some sense. I can imagine they might be concerned with political relations with other countries, do you think?
Honestly, I have no idea. Given my discussions recently with CASA, I think they're just being incredibly risk adverse.
Oh, okay. Yep. That makes sense. All right. So that's interesting. So do you feel amateurs are that they're complying with these rules? Like, do they understand the spirit, and what drives them to comply with when they're out there alone?
So how do you mean in what context, Australia or elsewhere?
Yeah, just in the context of having restrictive rules that keeps you from doing something you want to do, even though no one may know about it. Why would balloonists follow this?
There is relatively low, but there is a risk of prosecution. And I guess now, given that this is becoming a lot more visible, it was really a niche hobby. You had to look in the right spot. I know people online are saying, "Oh, why didn't the military just look on APRS?" Well, they wouldn't know what APRS is, right? But now there's more visibility. I think us hobbyists are going to need to be far more careful about this. we need to seriously make sure we're complying with our local regulations, and it will change from country to country.
Hmm.
But yes, I look at our local regulations for small balloons, and the requirements to do it are really unbalanced with the risk profile of such a launch.
Hmm.
When it
Yeah.
costs $400 to get approval to launch a 15-gram payload underneath the party balloon, you really got to ask yourself why. Why is that the case? Effectively, our current rules in Australia make it illegal to walk outside and let go of a party balloon.
Hmm.
That
Wow.
is, you could be criminally prosecuted for doing that, according to what CASA are saying. So
That's fascinating.
it's crazy.
Yes. And the yeah, that's interesting, and it's unfortunate, given that the statistical risk of these Pico balloons is extremely low. Even with altitude of aircraft, they are almost insignificantly small compared to the structural strength of an aircraft, and there are no recorded impacts, incidents between aircraft and certainly amateur balloons, and I'm not aware of any with radiosondes, though I'm not privy to all of the history. So the sky is really big, so it's unfortunate that the thing that they have restricted is the safest type that are up there. But anyway, all right. Well, Mark, I think we're getting close to wrapping this up. I'll just go through some of the regulations and questions here. But thank you so much for stopping by. Mark, the operator maintainer of sondhub.org, which you can see all of the Pico balloons in the world on, as well as amateur and radiosondes. Is there anything else that, Mark, that you want to bring up or cover?
No, I think you've gone through it pretty well. I know there was a question in the chat regarding what would happen if a Pico balloon was ingested by a jet engine. I think the answer is almost nothing, right?
Mm-hmm. I believe so. I'm not an engineer of that type, but yeah. Well, thank you, Mark. We'll see you later. Bye. All right, let's take a look at the chat and see if you guys have any questions going on. Stratocat asks, how often are balloons along the hemisphere and they cross the equator and vice versa? I don't have stats on that. By the way, Stratocat is Stratoballoon on Twitter. Be sure to follow him there. When balloons are launched and they're floating on either side of the equator, cross it? And the answer is very rarely. The weather patterns on the Earth are not random. One of the drivers of the winds on this planet and weather is the sun heating the land, water over the equator. And when the land is heated, it transfers that heat to the air. The air warms, and the warm air rises like it's a chimney over the equator. And as that damp tropical air climbs up, it gets cold, condenses, and forms thunderstorms, rain clouds, which is why the equator tropical regions are wet and rainy, because the rising warm air is so wet and gets cold and dumps water down to the ground. But that air doesn't stop after it's dumped on the ground. It continues rising. It's still a little warmer than the rest of the air around it until it gets up into the stratosphere, where it kind of runs up out of height and it kind of mushrooms over on either side of the equator and sort of falls back downward towards cooler areas. But what this causes is a sort of like a little hill in the atmosphere that keeps winds from crossing the equator, because basically all of the wind is generated in this sort of fountain belt that circles the planet. So it's unlikely and very difficult for balloons to cross the equator unless they're very well controlled. Project Loon's balloons could change altitude to sort of thread the needles of trying to find convoluted paths of different altitudes near the equator to kind of slip through, you know, these winds that are generally all being up from the equator. So let's see what else we have here. Transponders. Do we know if the balloon over Lake Huron was amateur? We don't. Its description doesn't really match amateur balloons, and the altitude it was operating at doesn't match with normal Pico balloon flights. I'm not going to speculate on what it was, but I don't think anything serious. I'm not going to speculate, but I don't think it was any import. Question, what do you believe when Biden made the statement this afternoon? First, we will establish a better inventory of unmanned airborne objects in space above the United States airspace to make sure that inventory is accessible and up to date. He basically means they need to make sure that they have radars and tracking systems that can monitor the locations of objects small and going at this speed. Like Sondhub, apparently the government wasn't tracking these little balloons. I honestly would have expected they were, given the government is sharp. But if they were, they knew they weren't dangerous, or if they weren't, they classified them as glitches. So obviously they're going to change that and track them probably just like aircraft would be. So they understand the situation and honestly can figure out how to deal with it. So, all right, it would make our 4 kilogram launches extremely difficult. Depends, rules change. Golfpex asks, so is it confirmed that the rules are changing? It is confirmed that the rules are changing. The president stated that the regulation unmanned objects, unmanned balloons, is going to be looked at and changed to deal with this. We don't know how it's going to change, but looking at balloon laws in other countries gives examples of potential ways this could be adjusted. As Mark mentioned, in Australia, you have to pay a fee and have an application be approved and discussed with an agency. In the UK, it is even more restrictive, where I believe the balloon flight regulations limit your size of the balloon itself to something very small, and I believe they forbid amateur radio transmissions from the balloons. So the UK users have had to develop very weak power transmitters that operate on unlicensed frequencies. They've done great work with that, with tiny little balloons, and they were the ones who I think really developed a lot of the circuitry that runs on these Pico balloons due to the small balloons they have to use over there. Let's see. Golfpex asked, if I launched a balloon today but notified the FAA, air traffic control, and had a radar reflector, would it get shot down? I can't answer that. That's not up to us. However, what he's describing is a balloon that is meeting the letter of the law above and beyond. Our balloons do not have to have a radar reflector or tell ATC or notify the FAA. You got a better chance at not being shot down. One of the things to remember is that normal amateur balloons just go up and down. And those type have not been involved in any of these incidents at all. And they are classed, again, they're almost identical to radiosondes. So the FAA and the government is well versed in the properties of these things, even if they're not tracking them. Let's see. Yeah. Aiden asks, do you think the FAA regulations will change after this these incidents in the United States? And yeah, they will. The balloon regulations in the U.S. are classified under Title 14 CF part. I can't remember. Is it Part 14 title? Anyway, it's 14 CFR 101 that the balloon laws are under. We'll take a glance at them, and that's very likely the section that's going to change. It regulates everything that's not manned, balloons, kites, rockets, etc. Actually, it doesn't cover drones. It's a different section. But this would be where balloon things would be added or changed. The ICAO has an annex, Annex 2, I believe, where the international would go in that section. One of the things amateurs can do right now to try and be on their best behavior, I don't know that it's going to be any good, but I would advise that amateurs, honestly, I would advise holding off on flying any kind of balloon. It is completely legal to fly all of the balloons. The Pico balloons, it's legal to fly normal weather balloons, and it's probably fine. If you do fly the balloons, I would fly them above and beyond the letter of the law. While we have the less than 12-pound exemption, you have to do almost nothing to fly. There are some parts of the law that apply above that exempt limit. They're easy for you to implement, and they're kind of fun, honestly. And that is carry a radar reflector. You can get designs on the internet. Just get some foam core and some aluminum tape from Amazon. You make a corner cube reflector. You can see the details on the internet. Just wrap aluminum tape around 3 pieces of foam core and just slot them all together. And it will reflect radio waves with tremendous brightness. It's like reflective vests at night, where they reflect the light so brightly straight back at your eyes, but they don't look reflective if you're standing to the side of them and not holding a light. Those corner cubes do for radar. So air traffic control sees you as a bright blip instead of just a faint little flicker from your little circuit board. So fly a radar reflector and file a NOTAM, a Notice to Air mission. The day before your flight, call 1-800-WX-BRIEF. That is the flight services number for the, and just ask them for a briefer. Ask them for a briefer for your state and tell them you want to file a highball NOTAM. This information will be out there on the internet, but I'll just type the details here. File a NOTAM. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF. Ask for briefer. Ask to file NOTAM. Filing a NOTAM is very easy for amateurs and anyone really. A NOTAM is simply a message that will appear when a pilot is getting ready to take off and asks for a list of anything that could be unusual that would concern them on their trip or their operations. So when you file a notice like this, you will say where you're going to operate the balloon, when it's going to operate, so that pilots in the region will be told, hey, at 9 a.m. there's going to be a weather balloon climbing at 1,000 feet per minute through this area, and the pilot will probably decide to go around that slightly to avoid that. It's free, it's super simple. The people on the phone are really friendly. So call 1-800-WX-BRIEF and file a highball NOTAM. They will ask you for the information from you. So this is the time, the location. You can give them the GPS coordinates, or sometimes it's better to tell them a nearby town or something like that. sometimes they want VOR, radial, and range, but that's beyond the scope of this discussion. The brief will usually help you get the information right. They want this to be safe. So that's a NOTAM. And the other part of the NOTAM that's important, this is the harder one, amateurs. You need to keep the NOTAM corrected, because as in many field operations, there can be delays in launching. There's rarely launch comes early, but if there's more than about an hour's delay, as soon as you know there's going to be any shift in the schedule, like if you get to the launch site and it takes an hour longer than you expected to get there, call WX Brief right away to amend the NOTAM to change the launch time to whatever time you still estimate it. If it comes close to launch time and you know it's not going to make it, call them again. If you've passed launch time and you're still a ways away from making it, call them again. Update this. That will really help people in the system, the pilots, and these days it will show them that we're willing to do whatever we can to play in the system and reassure people and be safer than legally required right now. The other that's not required, but is very courteous, is to call the Regional Air Route Traffic Control Center, ARTCC. Let's do this, write this out. Call ARTCC, Air Route Traffic Control Center, Regional ATC. Just type a little title for you guys to see. Oops, if I can make the acronym right, you will have a better time at Googling that. Okay, so you filed your NOTAM, and legally, if you're under the exempt limit, meeting the requirements of typical amateur ballooning, you don't have to tell ATC when you're flying or what you're doing. Do tell ATC what you're doing. Be kind, again. And to do that, you want to call the Regional Air Traffic Control Center. If the local city airport needs to know, this Air Traffic Regional Center will tell them and update them. It's not bad form to also tell the local one, because you need to know how to get a hold of both of these. ARTCC will probably give you the number of the local tower if you need to talk to them. You may have heard of air route traffic control centers, the regional ATC as center, like New York Center, Oakland Center, LA Center, and these are what controls all the high altitude air traffic. Like when airplanes, jets are on their way, they don't talk to Cleveland, they don't talk to Boise, they talk to Chicago Center or something like that just routes you through no matter what's down below, and keeps you on your way. And that makes sense as to why we would want to talk. They would want to know about us. And they're the ones that you should call, or the local tower, to tell them when you're launching. Like, okay, you updated the NOTAM, and now you're going to launch close to on time, that's fine. But when you're launching, center or your local tower and tell them, hey, this is me, we're launching now. They'll say thank you. They may ask you to give them position updates every so often. Again, legally not required, but it's real nice to do this for them. And they won't ask for often, like every hour or half hour. And when you're falling on your parachute, call them again. You want to let them know that before you get below 60,000 feet. Again, this is a requirement for larger balloons, but let's do it. Let's see what else. those really are the big ones. The radar reflector, the NOTAM, and the calling center get you a long ways down the road, being to making everyone comfortable that you're there and being statistically safer, because center will route airplanes around your estimated location. Like they'll probably route jets around a few degrees as to statistically reduce risk. Let's go over to the chat and see if we've got any questions or comments here. Radio Diver says, are owners required to notify airspace of their balloon entry exit? If you fall under the light, I should look this up. There's the weight class that the Pico balloons are in. You're not required to notify member states that have signed the ICAO treaties. You're not required to inform them when you come in, when you come out. If you're bigger than the light balloon class, I believe it's called, yeah, you've got to ask for permission, and you've got to tell them what they want, how often they want, and probably ask the next country for permission to enter as well. Let's see. As far as regulation changing, how soon does it need to pass Congress? I don't know. I don't know the answer to those. It is possible for the FAA to issue directives that are sort of urgent, temporary directives. The drone laws changed pretty frequently based on these semi or annual directives that weren't made into law. They were just sort of emergency letters of operation. I can't remember what it's called. I suspect that is what will come soon for balloons, is just like the COVID tests, is an emergency use authorization or something like that. And I would guess sometime this year that'll probably come, and that won't be the final law configuration. It will then go through more scrutiny and Congress to actually be made into a law, more debate. So Robert asks, I'm not sure I understand the point of going above and beyond. Are we agreeing that our balloons are a threat of any kind? Why support the notion? Good question. That's a good question. I think that is showing that we understand people are concerned, and that I think we are showing that we're willing to do some significant steps proactively, and if people see what we're doing that significantly increases the awareness, people's perceived comfort with our existence, they may consider those to be the right steps to require us to do. Those things that are super easy. And if we don't demonstrate that we're willing to figure out better ways to do it and demonstrate it and follow it without regulation, they may see that as like, oh, enough, instead of in the blind of their chambers and on the hill, developing regulations based on political theory or statistical risk. We might end up with very onerous things when the safety attained might be the same as if we had all made a good example of what it would be like if we did better, even though we don't have to. That's my theory. Is it might be good for us in the long run to just be proactive about better behavior, and people might chill out of the fact that we need to be super regulated. So, if that makes sense, Robert. What's the difference between a rule and a law? If it's legally enforceable, why does it bypass Congress? I don't know. Maybe somebody else here on the stream or chat can give us the difference between sort of the temporary rules or FAA directives and the final law. I mean, I do know, sorry, I do know basically the FAA did not have to go through a lot of review process to issue these temporary directives. When things actually have to go into the federal law, there has to be a lot of review, a lot of debate before these laws can pass through Congress and the Senate. And the FAA does not lightly create these kind of directives. That's supposed to be done very sparingly, except when urgent. Mark says, I'm required to email ATC with information 24 hours before the launch, and I include a tracking link. Nice, to SoundHub. And that's the sort of thing that hopefully the amateurs will be required to do. That's really easy, is just provide an online web tracking. So could the rule change be done in weeks? I mean, sure, technically, I think it could be. I don't know the FAA regulation or directive timelines, but my gut feeling is I would say a couple of months for a directive and, you know, a legislative actual law, probably 2 years out, but I'm not really, you know, I don't pay a political process, so that's out of my league there. If I launch a balloon in line with the FAA guidelines, but it gets shot down, I'm not facing any criminal penalties, right? Right now, no. You will not face any criminal penalties for the balloons that have been shot down. If those were yours, I would wear that as a... Anyway, no, you wouldn't, because you were following the laws. If you were following the laws. In the future, obviously, if we don't follow the guidelines, we'll be at risk of litigation. Civil, I think, and I don't think criminal unless there's vast, you know, damage, negligence, etc. The FAA penalties are all civil; they're not criminal. Robert says, but Dan, there was no threat posed by these balloons. Why did Biden make a statement today? It was about the Chinese balloon, not ours. We're an easy target. You're right. There was no threat posed by the balloons at all. And why did he make the statement today? I don't know, but it is a statement that we have been expecting to come in the amateur ballooning community to address the fact that it appears publicly that the United States was not aware of people's things drifting over the country for years. And that's kind of upsetting to a lot of people that things are passing by that our country is not paying attention to, and people might have some issue with such a permissive regulation allowing this, despite the fact that in reality there was no threat, and at this payload you can't really accomplish anything. It's just a matter of, you know, the public. We knew our laws were ridiculously permissive compared to the rest of the world, and sort of like, yeah, we're safe, but often the politics is not based on true safety. I don't want to get politics, but you know, things happen, and politicians must be reactive in some way to do their ostensive jobs. Yeah, it was about the Chinese balloon, but it became about balloons, because when they turned up the gain on the radar, they saw suddenly basically an onslaught of objects drifting into North America, which clearly weren't natural and weren't, you know, they didn't know about them, and they didn't understand what they were. So obviously the defending our territory, you know, is what we did until we knew what they were. I'm not agreeing with that, but it's what happened. Dan, what's your YouTube channel link? I can't find it. I'll paste it in the chat here. It is in my Twitter bio, but I'll paste it in the chat here. Let's see. So, where is it? Almost there? There you go. There you go, Bill. Without a link, you can copy and paste that. Okay, so a few more questions here. Then we're kind of trying to map of restricted airspace. Does SoundHub show this? SoundHub doesn't show this restricted airspace. Globally, I think, I know there's sources, definitely drone programs, drone flight websites will tell you where that is. Let me do just a quick search. What was that site that had all the, was it SkyVector? Planning aeronautical charts. Yeah. Let's see if this is showing restricted airspace. Layers. Skyvector.com sort of does, but it's not really what I'd consider that useful. I know there are websites out there. I can put them on my, I'll put one on my, I'll tweet it. That's a really good question in the future. SoundHub will not show the restricted airspace. Yeah, Mark confirmed that. Agencies have limited rulemaking abilities within the laws that authorize the agency. In theory, it is bounded, although agencies can and do overreach. Beyond rulemaking, it does require a law. Okay. So, yeah, that does sort of answer what can the FAA come up with on its own in probably a faster amount of time than a law. There's a limit. Radio Diver says, do we need to start lobbying local politicians and or government officials, or reach out and help educate them? Thank you. Radio Diver, yeah, that's a nice thing to do. And what I would recommend is you talk to them about the really great uses of balloons. While they are really fun and interesting technical challenges, and individually cause us to learn further technical and skills and mechanical skills, electronics and computer skills. We also teach a lot of school kids how to do balloons and these technical skills. We contribute data to the the Weather Service, to universities and scientists, and I would definitely mention those, and that statistically we have proven that we're safe under the current laws. Radio Diver says, Before You Fly app. Is that a website? Let's see, Before You Fly. That's the drone. Yeah, it looks like it's a phone app and a desktop app. Yeah, oh, curious. Let's bring that up here. Let's see, we can take a look at that. So this might be one. Now, share the screen. Okay. So let's see what we can see here. Oh, there's definitely information here. This color-coded layers. Yeah. Not sure what they mean yet, but we'll zoom in on them here in a second. Let's go down here in Arizona. We've got a lot of red here. What's that mean? Okay, on the right it says loading. Ah, look at that. Restricted operations. Grand Canyon special. So there are rules about operating, I think, in or near restricted airspace. We'll take a quick scan through the U.S. regulations, but it's very dense. Bring those up. I don't have we don't have the time to go through the whole thing tonight, but I will give you the links to where those go. I'll tweet those links out. Let's see, share. Okay. This is the FAA, the CFR 101 that apply to the balloons. As you see here, more balloons, kites, amateur rockets, and unmanned free balloons. It is, of course, federal regulations, so it's very legally confusing. But we'll just skip through here briefly. Some of my annotations from before. You don't have to abide by a lot of the technical rules, like filing NOTAMs or radar transponders if you're 12 pounds or less, essentially. There's finer details, but you still have to abide by 1.7. Let's go look at that one, where no person may operate any balloon in a manner that hazard to other persons or their property. No person operating any moored balloon, unmanned free balloon, may allow an object to be dropped therefrom if hazard to the persons or property. And that's, it's very vague and debatable, so just be really careful with that. Sort of the implied question was restricted airspace. Let's try that. Okay, so 101.5 says you may not operate in a restricted area unless they have permission from the using or controlling agency. However, I believe that's not applicable to the balloon class. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that only 101.7 and the 101.1, yeah. Bill, back me up here, but is 103 and 105 not applicable if we're in the exempt class? So again, various things that we as AMA do, even if we are allowed to do it, nice to show that we're willing to behave above and beyond. Don't launch it in a restricted area. Avoid launching it in air traffic control zones. Again, call ATC, let them know. Keep away a reasonable distance from controlled airspace. Try not to fly through clouds. Try not to fly over a city in the first 1,000 feet. Yeah, various definitions here that a lot of these are very easy to comply with voluntarily. So yeah, it's not that much of an impact to do them. Let's see what else. So we get to bigger balloons. These are the things that you have to contain, like cut downs and ways for terminating, how to track the balloon after it's terminated. You have to respond to requests for termination. You have to carry lights, which makes sense for nighttime operations. I have a huge long cable or rope, unless you've got streamers on it that planes could see and not run into this huge long cable. And again, what I recommended voluntarily is to tell ATC what you're doing. Actually, they say the nearest ATC facility. So ARTCC will direct you to one either way. That'll get you there. And these are the things ATC might want, or the NOTAM might need to contain. Again, call ATC when the launch occurs. So this is the things I was just recommending earlier. Yeah, call them after you've landed. Okay, will respond. No, not yet. Scott asks, are you aware of any cases where a foreign state has where a foreign state has objected to overflight of PICO balloons or questioned whether a PICO balloon qualified as exclusively for meteorological purposes per ICAO rules? I'm not. I am not, aware of everything that goes on. It is entirely possible, but if the United States was unaware that these balloons were flying, I think most of the countries in the world, not to be national egotistical, but we probably have one of the best, finest, calibrated radars on the planet. And if it's hard for us to see it, I suspect most countries would have a much more difficult time. So I doubt most people even knew they flew over, because of interest, the PICO balloons are not the only thing that's allowed. Heavier balloons are allowed to do this transit without permission. It's just very impractical to survive that long if you're much bigger than this. It requires a much more complicated balloon. So yeah, you still have to be fairly light, like the US exempt class, like 12 pounds or less. We'll look at the actual definition in a second, but normal sized balloon payloads would be detectable via radar, so presumably that may have happened in the, again, these PICOs are so ridiculously small, they're the size of a credit card circuit board. It's very, very hard to pick that up on radar, at least radar where you're expecting to see airplanes or missiles. Golfpex asks, where can I find this annotated document? Well, in my Google Drive. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think I don't know that it's a good idea for me to publish my assessment of the law. This is just a quick notes guide for when I'm explaining to cut through the legalese to sort of get a gist of what it means. Feel free to screenshot it. I'll ask a lawyer if it's okay for me to post this, but I can't promise anything. EOSS.org, I believe, has an annotated one. Okay, I've made a note about that. Let's actually, I'm going to take a little bio break here, and while I'm gone, I will let you all watch a very pretty video that I shot while I was on Project Loon. Google's balloon project flew for about 10 years actually, 2011 to 2021, and managed to get a fleet of balloons, up to 100 of them in the air, circling the planet, very nicely coordinated with everything. And providing internet, cell phone service to Peru and Kenya and other places, and they would last for up to a year. They were steerable. Google could steer those around the world and to hang around service areas. So I'm going to let this loop. This is a launch out of. It's a launch out of Winnemucca, Nevada, out of their automated balloon launching mechanism. Let's turn me off. And this on. I'm just gonna let that loop. I'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, we're back. Let me turn the music down a hair there. All right, so yeah, a little tangent. That video was shot by me as Stratocat. It was an early model, possibly an IBIS. I can't remember, when that was shot, but probably 2016, 2015, maybe 2015. Indeed, this was the automated balloon launching system that Loon used through most of its 14, probably 2015 through the end. Yeah, through 2015 through 2021, I believe this machine was operational. And as you can see, it lifted balloons up, it filled them, lifted them, and released the payloads. It was only technically, economically useful if you launched a lot of balloons. It was a stupendously expensive system. But also of personal interest, one of the projects that I worked on is in this video. Let's see here. How can I get there? I'll just show you on the ground. Right there. The white machine that's under that tent, you can see kind of a white frame on the ground there, is the machine that I actually designed and built. It is the helium fill control system that monitors or delivers a certain number of moles of gas into the balloon. So anyway, just to wrap up, we're going to take a look through the international balloon laws. I believe it's very hard to find. Unfortunately, they charge for this. I do think I know some place where someone has it online. Otherwise, it's very hard to get. We'll just kind of skim through it slowly, though. It's very dense. Let's turn that off. Check questions just before we go into that. See you, Robert. Good to see you. Good to hear you chatting. Sheila, yeah. I know Sheila from, from Winnemucca. I used to work out there for many years and got to know some great local people, including Sheila. And you're trapped in a time loop, indeed you are, but it's with balloons, so it's not that bad. Okay. Let's look at the international rules real quick. Then we'll wrap up with, wrap up. Share screen. The ICAO we've been talking about. Where did its windows go? Is that it? There we go. Can you read that? Yeah, read that. Okay. It's this is page 77. The actual title of this document is International Standards Annex 2 to the Convention on International Civil Aviation, Rules of the Air. The ICAO Rules of the Air. July 2015. 2005 edition. Yeah. Okay. And it was updated in 2018 was the latest revisions. Nice. We got a pretty up-to-date one. Back to page 76. That's Appendix 5. This is very hard to find on the internet, so I'm going to stroll through it slowly. If you really are interested in this, this video will be posted as a recording on all of these sites afterwards. So feel free to screenshot as you need. So, what is an unmanned free balloon? They classify it into three categories. Light is very similar to the U.S. definition of exempt, and not too different from Mark's description of Australian. He said that they fall into the light oftentimes. In the U.S., sometimes our balloons fall into the medium class, and amateurs generally do not fly heavy, though you can if you do all of the requirements of radar, reflectors, things like that. And they're kind of convoluted. So you have to obey the laws where you launch them in your country. here we go, right off the bat. An unmanned free balloon not be operated across the territory of another nation without appropriate authorization from the other nation, unless it's used for meteorological purposes and operated in a manner prescribed by the appropriate authority. These Pico balloons can be classed as exclusively for meteorological purposes because all of the data has occasionally been used for wind pattern research, ongoing, I believe, at some places. And that's, so it is being used for meteorological purposes. There's not much else they're useful for, not much else they can do. Interesting. Authorization from the other nation should be obtained if there's a reasonable expectation that it may drift into airspace over another nation. Okay, so this is just the requirements of light, heavy, or medium, and the class, payload mass, and the requirements on the left. That's confusing. We'll move on. Okay, don't create a hazard. Don't operate over the high seas without coordination with the proper ATS. Oh, that's cute. Again, similar to the U.S., don't operate it in flight conditions where airplanes can't see you. Yeah, same rules of big balloons. Make sure you can terminate flights easily. Oh, they've added about super pressure. That is a new one. Huh. They're just saying a super pressure balloon will pop guaranteed if you drop your payload off of it, so don't fret about terminating the super pressure balloon separate from the payload. And that's true. When you drop your payload off of super pressure, it's going to rocket up until it pops. Radar reflectors. Lights. Rope with colored streamers. Pre-flight notification, as we discussed, variations on the NOTAM, variations on the ATC decision. Notification of launch, as we talked about before, similar to the US. You'll see that most of this is almost lockstep with the FAA. Let the ATC know if you've canceled your flight, reporting positions, and that's it. That's it. So it's about as long as the FAA. Pretty darn similar. And we will, I suspect, see changes to the international ICAO regulations as well, as President Biden indicated that we would be looking at unmanned free balloon regulations in the United States and looking into harmonizing them with other nations as well. We'll go ahead and wrap up here, unless anybody else has any questions. And why don't we end it with the, I'll read the lyrics since I can't leave you the music to the song 99 Balloons. The song was written in 1984 by the band Nena, which lived in West Berlin, or West Germany, which of course was divided by the Soviets in East Germany versus the free West German. And so they were at the nexus there of the Iron Curtain. The threat of nuclear war was ever present, you know, it's symbolic all the time along that Iron Curtain in Europe. And unfortunately, the situation in the past few weeks has almost completely echoed this narrative. You and I in a little toy shop buy a bag of balloons with the money we've got. set them free at the break of dawn, till one by one they were gone. Back at base, sparks in the software flash the message, something's out there. Floating in the summer sky, 99 red balloons go by. 99 red balloons floating in the summer sky. Panic bells, it's red alert. There's something here from somewhere else. The war machine springs to life, opens up one eager eye, focusing it on the sky. The 99 red balloons go by. 99 Decision Street, 9 ministers meet. To worry, worry, super scurry, call the troops out in a hurry. This is what we've waited for. This is it, this is war. The president is on the line as 99 red balloons go by. 99 knights of the air ride super high-tech jet fighters. Everyone's a superhero, everyone's a Captain Kirk, with orders to identify, to clarify and classify, scrambling the summer sky. 99 red balloons go by. As 99 red balloons go by, 99 dreams I have had, and every one a red balloon. It's all over, and I'm standing pretty in this dust that was a city. If I could find a souvenir just to prove the world was here, and here it is, a red balloon. I think of you and let it go. So, as you can tell, everything but the last verse is exactly what happened this past week. I'm not going to exaggerate how lucky we are, but never thought the balloons would bring about international incident, so closely echoing that narrative. Anyway, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate everyone's in the chat. It's good to see all the people. Bill, WB at ELK, I'll post the link to the ICAO rules that I know someone has out there. And so everybody, be careful out there, amateurs. We'll get through this.